Okay, very, very good question. So I will have to make a disclaimer first before even I address the question for everyone to know that, because most people don't know how, in terms of jurisdiction, how does a Jewish court function? And most people think that if one Bet Din or one Jewish court makes a ruling, that is binding for all Jews in the whole world. And I will have to say that's not the case. Today, because we lack a Sanhedrin, which is a national court in the Holy Land, what we have are various courts throughout the entire diaspora. And each one of those courts can establish what are called takanot or gezerot, reparations to the law or ordinances which protect the negative mitzvot, which are those commandments which are the don'ts. Don't do such and such thing. And as the Rambam explains in the introduction of Mishneh Torah, one court cannot force another court to accept its rulings. So, or from one country to another country, one court cannot force the other to accept the ruling. And this is basically the space in which we find ourselves today. So what happens is when a ruling is made by one court in one particular place, whoever has the best or the most media coverage will have the most acceptance around the world. That's one of the things that's happening today with the power of the internet. When a ruling is made in a Jerusalem court, for example, J-Post or Arush Sheva or one of the Israeli newspapers or the various Jewish newspapers around the world will cover those cases, publicize it. They'll put it on YouTube, they'll put it on Facebook, they'll put it everywhere. And people read, as they read this, wherever they live, including rabbis, they will then decide whether they want to respect that ruling or not. So that's the space in which we find ourselves today. And that's how it has been for the last 1,500 years or so. And so that's the first thing that I need to say about how this functions. What is the next part of your question?
Yeah. So with that point, now that we have that, Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky, he gave a ruling. Right. There was a group of rabbis that were in communication with Igbos, some traveled, right. Different things happened, and they came back with their data. Mm-hmm. And people have to realize Rabbi Chaim Kanetsky, when he passed away, there was over 1 million people came to his funeral. Right. He's one of the most respected rabbis in our generation. Mm-hmm. And as Rob Demota just said, the rabbinical rulings and what goes on with the state of Israel are two different things. And we're not really addressing immigration issues or any of that. That's not the point of this discussion. But he came to a ruling based off of the data that was acquired by his Rabbanim, and he gave a ruling. Now, the thing is that he brought in the idea of reacclamation, because that was really the issue. The issue isn't whether the Igbos were Jewish or not, or Israelites, whatever term you want to use. The issue is how do they reacclimate, right?
That's correct. So I now I remember exactly how I wanted to address your question. So in previous rulings, like the one of Rabbi Kamnietsky, the question was raised to him, we have these people in Nigeria called Igbos. They have this, they have that, they do this, they do that. Should we consider them Am Israel, Bnei Israel? Should we consider them as Jews? And the rabbi said, if they have all that, yes, but they should do Giyur Lehumrah. They should do Giyur Lehumrah in order to be accepted within the Jewish nation. And most people don't know what that means. They don't know what that means, a Giyur Lehumrah. A Giyur Lehumrah is a legal mechanism which was invented or emerged, I would say, after the state of Israel was founded. So after the 1950s, in order to remedy or repair the question of doubts of the various Jews who were migrating to the state of Israel. If we do the legal anthropology, or the legal history of this very same question of Jewishness. Well, we're going, if we look, I have written an article about it. In fact, between a difference between the legal system among Ashkenazim and among Sephardim. And what we see is that the Ashkenazim in the 10th century or so, from the time of Rabbi Gershom of Mentz, alav shalom, from that time in the first and the second crusades, there's a marked difference as to how the Rabbanim are treating the cases of those Jews who were estranged to the community because of Christianity. And so the question is, how do we deal with those who converted and now want to come back? Those rabbis who lived before the first crusades unanimously say they are Jews, they are our brothers. The fact that they became Christians doesn't make them non-Jewish. And if they want to come back, then they have a certain procedure to do so. Some of them say simply just reintegrate into community and renounce the Avodah Zarah. But then when we look at this very same literature among Ashkenazi rabbis after the second crusades, what we start seeing is a number of opinions, so many different opinions. And one of those opinions, which to this day, some rabbis are quoting in Israel, surprises me, from the 15th century, from the Maharam, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, Bavaria. He said that those Jews who converted to Christianity, even though it was by force, if they want to come back, they need to shave all the hair, like a baby. They need to shave all the hair, and they need to receive flogging. They need to be flogged, and they need tebilah. So you have three criteria there for return. And to this day, you will hear some rabbis who are quoting this very same Pesach Din from the 15th century from Rothenburg. And so what we see as we progress forward, this issue of anusim, of Jews who are forced, who are coerced or under duress among the Ashkenazim, in the context of the Soviet Union in Russia, we have, or in the 19th century, we have Rabbi, the Petichet Teshubah, Rabbi Moshe Eisenstadt. And what he says is something very interesting. He says that those who have been estranged to the community and want to return, those rebels, mumarim, he uses the term mumar, that want to come back, all they need is tebilah before 3. They need tebilah, ritual immersion, and they can do this tebilah on Shabbat. That's very interesting, because normally an immersion that's done for the case of Giur cannot be done on the Shabbat. But he writes in his commentary, if you look on Petichet Teshubah, the commentary Petichet Teshubah, in the Shulchan Aruch, which I have here behind me, on the laws of Gerut. So that's in Yoreh De'ah. Yoreh De'ah, I believe it's page 268, 269, the laws of conversion. And in his commentary, he says that they can do this on Shabbat because it's not a Giur. As we progress forward into the 20th century with the state of Israel, all of these opinions become, I would use the term, amalgamated into a type of soup. And what emerges is what's called Giur Lehumra. So Giur Lehumra, 2 terms, Giur, conversion, Humra, from the word strict. So we have a rule, we have a halachic principle which says, Safek midoraita lehumra. Whenever you are faced with a doubt of a Torah mitzvah, a Torah precept, we must take the strict approach or opinion. And so Giur Lehumra is exactly that. It's okay, this person says he's Jewish or Israelite, but we don't have proof. We don't have the proof. Therefore, this person should do a Giur, and it should not be like a person who's trying to learn to be Jewish and has to study for a long time, but this person should be received immediately and just do the Giur out of doubt. Some people call it Giur Mesafek. Others call it giur lehazara, or giur of return. So all these terms are basically the same for the same exact principle. Now I've explained what goes on in the Ashkenazi, according to Ashkenazi jurisprudence. When we go to Sephardic jurisprudence on the same exact matter, beginning with the Rambam in the 13th, 14th century, in his Igeret Hashemat, and in the Mishneh Torah, Ilchot Mamerim, chapter 3, Halacha 3, he states those Jews, those Israelites who have been under duress, who were forced to convert to Islam, they are Jews. And if they want to come back, they can come back. There's no ritual process. With the exception if they were not able to, the men were not able to undergo Berit Milah, the circumcision, then they have to do that. But there's no notion of Tebilah at all. And also he addresses the issue of the Karaites in the Mishneh Torah. That is the context of this law. And he says that they are like Tinok Shenishba. They are like children who have been sequestered by the nations and have been indoctrinated in their practices and their customs. And then he says, if they come back, if they approach the Jewish community and they know that they are Jews, they shall be received. They are like anusim, he says. They are like ke'anus. They are under duress. And that's a very interesting legal term, because in the law it says, kol anus rahmana patre. Any Jew who is under duress, the merciful one exempts him. So that means that all of those judgments that the law requires to apply to a Jew or an Israelite that violates the laws like Shabbat, Kasherut, and many other things, that person, because of that situation of duress, is exempt. And of course, there are three exceptions to that. We learn idolatry, murder, and sexual morality. So the Rambam finishes saying, and we should not rush, speaking to the judges, we should not rush to go and seek their death. In other words, we should give life and instruct them and bring them to the wings of the Shekhinah. This ruling of the Rambam became the basis for all of the Sephardic Chachamim unto this day. And what we see is a continuity of how rabbis, after the expulsion of Spain, whether they are in the lands of the Ottoman Empire or North Africa, or whether they are in Western Europe, like in Italy or Amsterdam, they are all ruling in the same exact way. There are some nuances here or there, but they're all basing the Jewish identity of those Jews who are under duress on the notion of Hazakah. So the notion of Hazakah, that legal premise or that legal principle is the way that all Jews can be considered Jews today. I remember one of my colleagues, Chacham Jacob de Oliveira, we had a long talk in 2008 before I moved to the Dominican Republic. And he said to me, Yehonatan, all Jews today are Jews by Hazakah. And it didn't dawn on me at that time exactly what he was saying until I started to travel around the world and started to deal with various cases and started to see that he had a very strong point. What that means is that there are practically no Jews today that can trace a lineage going all the way back to Mount Sinai or even to Ezra. So what that means is that Jews, or those who claim to be Jews today, are Jews because of the notion of legal presumption, which in Hebrew is Hazakah. And there are various ways that Hazakot, in the plural, are established. There's the law of majority. There's a law of a portion that is extracted from another one. There are many principles. I made podcasts about this, 10 different podcasts on how to establish different types of Hazakah. And just to put it to you, to bring it close to us, many Jews today descend from Holocaust survivors. And those Jews who perished, those that survived, and were able to escape to the lands of North and South America. When they arrived to the new places, they came with no documents, no witnesses. They came with nothing, just with the clothes they have on their backs and their shoes. And in some cases, they even changed their surnames to be able to hide the Jewish identity. They changed the names. And so the question is, how can this person and their grandchildren, their children and grandchildren, how can they claim to be Jews within a new context, having no witnesses, having no documents, having nothing? And the answer is very simple: Hazakah. So what do the rabbis do in those cases? They would, when that person approaches the local rabbi, the rabbi would say, "Tell me, what's your name?" "Oh, my name is so and so." "Oh, I'm from this. Well, my parents and grandparents were from such and such place. They were part of this community." And if the rabbi then wants to investigate more, the rabbi would then ask and say, "Tell me, what did you see your mother and grandmother do on Fridays before sunset?" And we all know the practice is to hadlakat ner shel Shabbat. And so all of these, what we call modus operandi, the way of acting, are the hazakah for the individual to prove his or her Jewishness before a court. So in the Talmuds, in Tractate Chulin, chapter Akol Shohatin, which is the first chapter, we have a principle. We see it clearly in the laws of Shahita. It says if you see an Israelite performing Shahita, we don't doubt that that person knows what he or she is doing. We give them the legal presumption that they are experts. So we do not bring the doubts first. This principle, this legal principle of Hazakah, of legal presumption that's given to a shochet, the Sephardic Chachamim utilize this principle in determining Jewish identity of those Jews who have been estranged for centuries from the mainstream Jewish communities in the Ottoman Empire, or even in Western Europe. We'll see it in various responsa of the Chachamim of Salonika, of the responsa Peri Etz Chaim in Amsterdam, and the responsa in Italy by the Chachamim like from Padua, like Leon de Moderna and others. They are utilizing these legal principles to establish the Jewish identity or Israelite identity of those who have been cut off for a long time. And they are still Jews if they have that legal presumption. And so this legal presumption can be utilized today for various, not only for individuals who have been, because in the case of one individual, the individual comes from a majority. If we can establish that one person came from a particular condition which expresses or which represents the majority in another place, and we can prove that connection, then we can also establish the hazakah of this person based on this hazakah. In the same way, the Chachamim use the language of the flour. You take a piece of the flour from, like when we take out the challah or the terumah, you take that little portion away from the big batch. This same exact imagery is utilized to establish this halachic principle of farish min ruba farish, a portion that is extracted from a heterogeneous portion is representative of that majority. I know I'm saying a lot here, but it's very important for people to understand how this functions, because a lot of people don't know how or why they are Jews. A lot of people think if you have a piece of paper, that is your Jewishness. But if that piece of paper gets burnt or destroyed, you don't have those witnesses. So how do you prove Jewishness? How do you do it? All you have is the way you live, what you do, your actions, your testimony. And if you have people who know of you as living as a Jew, you have witnesses. But if those witnesses also perish, then you have no documentation, and you're in a place where you're not able to tap into your Hazakah, your community of witnesses, then you are cut off. So how do you reintegrate? And this is my expertise in the law.
So yeah, this is like extremely important, extremely educational, because like you're saying, today, especially, with the state of Israel growing, Baruch Hashem, and the Jewish community and social technology, all these different factors that are here, there's people that are emerging all over the world. There's people throughout Africa, people in India, people in certain European countries, different places around the world that say, the Middle East, hey, we have Jewish lineage, we have these backgrounds. So what you're giving us is an outlook, to kind of like, when we hear these claims, to not necessarily reject them,
Right. I would say something else too. I spoke first about the Ashkenazi legal system, and there's no continuation. There are many differences, but I will mention one rabbi Ashkenazi rabbi that's very close to us, that many will probably know the name. The Hazon Ish was Rabbi Karavitz. The Hazon Ish wrote in one of his responsum about Kohanim, and the question was, how do we know today that those who claim to be Kohanim are actually Kohanim and that they are Kesherim? And what he says there is astounding. And I used his halacha, his ruling for the ruling on the Igbos. And that's how I ended. I call that the knockout punch. And I'm going to tell you why. Because what he says there is, no Kohen, no one today claiming to be a Kohen, can trace his lineage all the way back to Ezra HaKohen. But we presume that person and that family are actual Kohanim because of their performance. And we do not raise the doubt that perhaps they married a woman that we're not supposed to. We know from the Torah, Perashat Emor, that a Kohen who marries a Zonah, Gerusha, Halala, the children are not apt to be Kohanim. They're considered Halalim, Kohanim Halalim. And so the Hazon Ish says, we don't presume for the negative, we presume for the positive. Why? Because there's Hazakah. And how is a Hazakah established? For Kohanim, there are two types of Hazakah. There's a Kohen who has Hazakah of genealogy, and there's a Kohen who has Hazakah of performance in the community. So we have a Kohen who blesses the congregation on all the services and reads the Torah first and says and gives and receives the honor to say Birkat Hamazon. This is a Kohen who has the Hazakah of synagogue performance. And then you have a Kohen by genealogy. This type of Kohen is one, according to the Halacha, is a Kohen who has witnesses for 3 generations, father and grandfather, who served in the Bet HaMikdash. You know what that means? Today, we have no Kohanim with this kind of Hazakah because we haven't had the Bet HaMikdash for almost 2,000 years. So all Kohanim today are only Kohanim based on the second level of Hazakah, which is at the synagogue level. And it should be of no surprise to us that when in 2008, Dr. Doron Behar performed a genetic test on Kohanim at the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, only about 60% had descended from the same father. The other 40% had different paternal lineages. What that means is that there are various lineages of Kohanim or people claiming to be Kohanim who do not descend from the same ancestor or the same paternal ancestor, which we presume to be Aharon or Ezra. So for you to see how Hazakah functions, what are the limitations to Hazakah? Hazakah is not a way to prove 100% law. The Jewish law doesn't work that way. Jewish law works with legal presumption. That's what I can say about that. So in other words, if and that's why the Rambam says in the Mishneh Torah, if you see, he says, and this is based on Tractate Kiddushin, chapter 4, where it says, כל משפחות ישראל יש להם כשרות להתחתן זה בזה. All Israelite families are fit to marry one with the other. They have the legal presumption to marry one with the other. However, if you see one family or specific family speaking Lashon Hara or creating problems in the community, then we put that family in doubt and we must investigate them. So the law works. The law doesn't assume that you have to prove who you are. It gives you the legal presumption that you are who you say you are until proven guilty. Does that sound familiar? In American law, you are innocent until proven guilty. That's how Jewish law works. In other places, no. They say, no, you need to prove that you are first. So Jewish law doesn't work that way. If it worked that way, the whole Jewish nation would be in trouble today because we don't have genealogies going all the way back to the time of period of the covenant. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and it's tough, for some people to really take in that thing because, like when the person's in a community and they see like a person convert to Judaism, generally they see like a very like stark approach where the convert has to do this and do that, this. So then at the end, the convert converts and they have their certificate, whatever. So I think that experience maybe reinforces to people in their community about their Jewish authenticity. Because if this person, go ahead, Rob.
Yes, you're right. You're bringing up a very good point. But you know what happens in a lot of cases? If that Jew with that certificate goes to another community where they don't recognize that Bet Din, they'll say, no, we don't accept you. So there, the Hazakah that person has in one place doesn't apply in another. And these are issues that are happening every day that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
So when it comes to the Igbo Jews specifically, right? What were your conclusions and what was your methodology to get to your conclusion?
All right, conclusions and methodology. So I explained earlier, for those who came late, we have to do the anthropology and history first. Jewish law requires us to do investigations first before interpreting the law and then finally applying the law. So in anthropology, we have a methodology, which is ethnography and ethnology, and perhaps even sociology. These are three methods that anyone who studies anthropology will learn. You immerse yourself in the culture, you study it, you observe it, and you take notes and you write about it, what you observed, and you include yourself in it. That's ethnography. Then the ethnology then is the interpretation of what those things mean, the meaning of those things you observed and also participated in. When you do the ethnology, that's where the Halakha comes in. You bring all the laws which can apply to the anthropology that you did. And then finally comes the conclusion. The interpretation of the anthropology and the law in the language of the rabbis, because Teshubotes, the responsum, are written in rabbinic language for rabbis, not for the lay people. So in the case when it comes to the Igbos, after 8 years of studying, of looking at the anthropology, first I must say that various books that have been written, many books on anthropology of Igbos.